everybody, and welcome to Vintage Mego. I am Brian, your host. And for this episode, we're going back to the Microverse to talk about the fantastic, the very iconic, magnetic Micronaut figures. Most of us North American kids knew them as Force Commander and Baron Karza, but they had a life before and after the Mego Micronauts brand. And it's something we're going to explore in this episode. The Micronauts toy line is primarily based on a Japanese action figure line that is called Microman. The word primarily is significant here, and it'll soon come into play. Mego's executives saw the Microman toy line at a company in the United States called Cal R&D, and they immediately saw the potential. The top Mego brass flew to Japan and signed a deal with Takara. Here's a photo from that event that I am very glad to own in my archive. In an interview, Marty Abrams once said that he was offered a lot of Japanese toy lines at that time, even what would become the Shogun Warriors, and he did regret not picking those up when he saw them on the shelves the following year from Mattel. The first wave of Micronauts debuted in 1977, and it was a massive hit for the company. Everything about this brand was right place, right time for Mego. The science fiction was in the zeitgeist, and Mego had an entire universe of 3 3/4-inch science fiction action figures to sell. When the second wave of Micronauts came to be, 2 curious new characters were introduced, along with the new vehicles and playsets. These figures stood apart as they were in a different scale, and what we would refer to as 1/12 now. However, they did have that interchangeable aspect to them, thanks to magnetic parts, and were largely accepted by us kids. We didn't really question why they were bigger than the other figures. What we had no clue about, as a kid anyway, is the origins of these figures. And this wasn't based on Microman at all, but on a TV show we'd all never seen. Steel Jeeg, or Kotetsu Jeeg, is a Japanese television series that aired from October of 1975 to August of 1976 and lasted 46 episodes. The series revolves around a threat coming from Inner Earth, and it is fought by a magnetic giant fighting robot called Steel Jeeg, who has interchangeable magnetic limbs. To aid in the fight, Jeeg also had a horse named Panzeroid that he could actually bond with. This series was produced by Toei Animation, and of course Takara had the license for it and created this fabulous magnetic figure. They also made Panzeroid. To get an original complete Jeeg is quite expensive, and I don't have one, but you can see by looking at him the origins of some of our favorite figures. Coincidentally, Takara also made a 3 3/4-inch Jeeg figure, and while Mego did not pick that up for the Micronauts, you can see elements of it in the Z-Toys Metal Man series of figures. Mego liked what they saw with the Jeeg figure and decided to retool it a little bit and give it some new names and characters for the Micronauts brand. Mego took the tooling and introduced 2 new characters using the Jeeg body, Force Commander and Baron Karza. While many have made the obvious comparisons to Star Wars, it's actually more accurate to point out that Mego was following the whole Black Knight, White Knight formula in their design. Force Commander is our hero, the White Knight, in the series, and just like Jeeg, he has firing fist rockets, a spring-loaded missile launcher from his torso, and all of his limbs are magnetic and removable. Just like Jeeg, Force Commander has a trusty steed that he can bond with and form a centaur-like creation. On the dark side, we have the evil Baron Karza. The name Karza is Azrak spelled backwards. This is a shot at the president of Remco, Marvin Azrak. Mego and Remco had a thorny relationship, and the company went out of their way to make sure they owned the copyright to the Abrams name backwards in case of any retaliation. Baron Karza's body was a duplicate of Force Commander's, although in black, and he had his own trusty steed. The aptly named Andromeda did battle alongside Baron Karza against Force Commander and Oberon. Baron Karza also became a very significant character in the Marvel Universe, as he was set up as the big baddie of the Micronauts comic. Marvel writer Bill Mantlo did an excellent job of developing Baron Karza as a real badass. I was always a little disappointed with his portrayal of Force Commander. In my head, Force Commander was the big hero of the Micronauts world, but in Bill Mantlo's world, it was Arcturus Ron and his ragtag band of characters, and we're all better off for that. Now, the Micronauts were a worldwide sensation. They really did get into a lot of markets. The three biggest would be the United Kingdom, which would be Airfix Toys, Canada under Grand Toys, where they sold remarkably well. But perhaps the most successful place in the world for the Micronauts was in Italy, where the line was called Il Micronauti and distributed by Jeeg Toys. Italian children were inundated with Japanese TV shows about robots. Even the original Jeeg TV series saw broadcast on Italian networks. This left children in Italy with a real love and appreciation for robot toys like this. Mego tried to expand and extrapolate on the concept, not the characters. They didn't add any new magnetic characters to the US Micronauts. However, they did pitch the concept to other licenses, such as the Black Hole Robots and the World's Greatest Superheroes. And the original World's Greatest Superheroes prototypes actually had firing fists, just like the Micronauts. The actual production versions did not. However, Mego had a tremendous trouble getting this stuff into the market in the United States. Buyers really weren't biting. However, I want to point out that Italy, in the form of Jeeg, took all of this stuff. They bought all of it and had it made. According to Mego's former vice president of R&D, Bill Barron, nobody understood the kind of market there was over in Italy. It's enormous for toys, and it just had to be the right toy. John Franco, who worked at Jeeg Toys, asked Bill Barron for some new designs for the magnetic figures. So Bill Barron, true to character, didn't go to any toy fair parties that night, but stayed at home and did some sketches of some characters for Jeeg. And the folks at Jeeg were very excited by them. The first design Barron came up with is known as the Emperor. Now, unlike Karza and Force Commander, it's really hard to argue that the Emperor isn't Star Wars inspired with his black cape and sword accessory. He also has some wonderful glow-in-the-dark parts in his face and his hands. Overall, he's a fantastic figure, but he never actually saw production in the United States. In fact, Jeeg produced it exclusively for Italy. They produced 400,000 of these, which is huge business for the time. Just like the earlier counterparts, the Emperor came with his own steed, this one named Megas, and you'll have to remove his cape to get him to interact with his horse, but that's no big deal. I think the Emperor might be one of my favorite Mego Micronaut pieces of all time, mainly because I can see it through a kid's eyes, and I would be completely captivated by this character. The Emperor was not alone in this new wave. There were two new characters added as well, both based on one single Bill Barron design. The only difference between the two of them is their color and their names, of course. The aptly named King Atlas is a beautiful crimson red, and it really reminds me of Gary Oldman's armor from the Dracula movie. King Atlas was accompanied by his steed Lantarian, and this is where the design changes a little bit, because Lantarian does not have a horse head, but more of like a quasi-alien insect influence. Flanking Red Atlas, or maybe it's his friend or his nemesis, my Italian's not very good, is the aptly named Green Baron, and this was named after Bill Barron. It is one of two Mego figures named after this fascinating person. The other one was Baron von Chill from Eagle Force. Green Baron's trusty steed is named Pegasus, and he is identical in design to Lantorian, save for being a green color. Both these figures had the same trimmings and extras that the earlier figures did. Jeeg also utilized the packaging style that Mego had established, although in the Italian language, giving it a nice line look. Jeeg also released a magnetic Micronaut figure designed by Takara in the form of Red Falcon in 1981. This more deluxe set was actually a repackaged Takara toy called Death Cross. The Death Cross commercials are so good, you would think there was a TV show to go with it, but essentially it was another repackaging of the magnetic theme. What sets the Red Falcon apart is the concept that there's actually two figures that can morph into each other or transform, which is something Takara would definitely explore in the years to come. Just a quick mention that our magazine, Toy Ventures, is now in its 9th issue, and the Spotlight article this time is about the Mego comic action heroes. So if you like what we do here, maybe consider checking it out. Links are below to our shop. Thanks for looking. Despite Mego's demise in 1983, the Micronauts and the magnetic figures seem to not be able to die. They came out in other forms. Jeeg actually created a fantasy line called Il Fantanati that I'll have to do an episode about. But more importantly, and more on topic, would be the formation of our toys and the fantastic world of the interchangeables, which looked very familiar, but the names had been changed. For instance, Force Commander was now referred to as Captain Cosmo, and his horse, the Cosmo Steed. Baron Karza got a new gray paint job and the cool moniker of Count Magno, his horse now called Magnus Steed. And the Emperor actually made his first appearance on US soil under the name Lord Meto. His horse Metallion was actually the same horse that they used for Green Baron and Red Atlas. Interchangeables would return a year later by another company, now M&D Toys. The only thing that was really interesting about this is the back of their packaging showed like chromed versions of the characters, but none of those got released. It's just cheap gray plastic. Once again, Italy reappeared with this line as well, as Jeeg created a line called the New Micronauts using these interchangeables figures. However, Jeeg retained the original Micronaut names. In 2003, the Micronauts line saw a revival in the form of Palisades Toys. Palisades was one of the more innovative companies at the time, and they really swung for the fences. They put a lot of care and thought into the entire project. They re-released a couple of figures in the magnetic line, including Baron Karza, the Emperor, and Red Falcon in very different color schemes and translucent figures. Unfortunately, the line was plagued with a lot of problems, specifically the factories not delivering the quality Palisades was looking for, and it cut short what was a really promising chance at a revival for the brand and the figures themselves. These sets are now quite valuable, and sadly, I didn't keep any. Just wanted to give a couple of shout-outs to some folks who really helped me with this. First of all, Ray Miller pretty much did all of this research. I'm just repeating what he told me. And want to give props to my friend Mark at Dr. Tongue's I Had That shop in Portland, Oregon. He's the kind gentleman who fixed me up with a few of these guys. And I've also heard his shop sells a certain magazine. I hope you'll check it out. The Force Commander figure you're looking at right here is actually mine from childhood. My initials, you can still read them in the back of his thighs. This is one of my favorite toys as a kid, and I kept every piece of him, which is rare when you're 7 and have ADHD. So I think it's kind of a testament to the toy's success and how well made it is. It's a really fantastic item. So that is my look at the Mego magnetic Micronaut figures. We'll probably touch on some of the other magnetic figures in future installments, but I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you are new to this, please consider hitting like or subscribe. If you're not new, please consider sharing. It really helps me out. That's it for this week. As always, talk toys, not other people, and be well. Cheers.